Joining us now, Congressman Rob Wittman from the 1st District in Virginia. That is the northern neck through Fredericksburg and most of our listening area on WJFN 100.5 FM and WNTW AM 820 92.7. And let's get to Congressman Wittman, who is the ranking member of the Sea Power Readiness Committee in Congress. Congressman Wittman, good to have you with us, man.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you.
Inaction from Congress on the border. A lot of people frustrated. The president and the administration saying, look, there's 3 laws that are protecting those that come into the country illegally that need to be changed. One is the Dianne Feinstein law. The second, of course, the Flores Amendment that says you can't hold a family with a child more than 20 days. That's being overwhelmed. And they say these are just basically a sucking sound agent to bring all these people in. There's chaos down there. Now there's a caravan coming, 15,000 people. And what the administration is saying is Congress has to do something to change the asylum laws. What say you?
Well, I agree, John. There needs to be significant reforms there because these laws as they exist are being exploited. And I understand the issues involved with the families coming from Honduras and Guatemala and the conditions there. But the bottom line is we still must have an orderly and thoughtful immigration process here in the United States. These laws don't allow for that. These laws that say that if people come from South America, if they come to the border seeking asylum, that if we can't process them, then we catch and release them. And, we're just overwhelmed with the number of immigration court judges that have to process these claims of asylum. So that's number one. Now, if you're coming from Mexico, then you can be immediately deported. So I think the key is we have got to make sure we have the ability to get these people to come through the legal ports of entry so they can have their claims of asylum processed quickly. I would prefer even this, John, that there be immigration court judges in these countries because we know what's going on there, and their claims of asylum ought to be processed in the country so they don't have to make this trek of over 1,000 miles here and then know that if they come across the border illegally that they're just going to be released. So that is not the way you have a thoughtful and reasonable border security policy or an immigration policy. And just as you spoke about too, the idea that we allow this and that somehow you don't need border barriers, walls, whatever you want to call them, to make sure we get people to the legal ports of entry is another part of this. So the policies from one end of the spectrum to the other need to be fixed, and Congress needs to do that. It's Congress's responsibility. Congress has punted on this for years, and this goes back not just to this president, but to President Obama and President Bush. In fact, the Republican House and the Republican Senate had a chance in the 115th Congress to do this, and they didn't. So shame on Republicans too for not getting it done. I thought there was a good bill there, and the first of Congressman Goodlatte's bill that was, a great comprehensive effort there to address not only border security but the visa lottery system, chain migration, even DACA and temporary protective status, which is the conditions under which folks seeking asylum come here to stay as they have their asylum claims adjudicated. So all those things were part of that to be fixed. I thought a very reasonable bill, and the leadership decided not to push it, and here we are now.
It's crazy. And you mentioned Congress has to act in changing these laws or modifying them so that they don't act as a magnet and an incentive for sucking migrants and illegals into the United States, which is what they're doing now, the 3 laws I mentioned. But is there other than there was Goodlatte 1, that addressed it, Goodlatte 2, that addressed it. Neither of them went anywhere, even though the Republicans control the House. And even if it did, they wouldn't have gotten 60 votes in the Senate. So total inaction. What about now? The Democrats run the House. Is there even a bill? Is there even a meeting? Is there anything bubbling up? Any bipartisan measure?
John, to this point, there's been no effort by the Democrat leadership in the House to bring anything forward to try to address this in any way. In fact, there are still some folks on that side of the aisle that say that this is not a crisis, that there's no issue there. I don't see how any reasonable person can look at this and believe that in February we had 78,000 people crossing illegally that were apprehended. And then in the month of March, a significant number, well over 100,000 trying to cross illegally. And remember that the whole complexity of this has changed. It used to be in the past that you had single males trying to cross, and they were trying to cross for employment opportunities. Now they're families, and remember, they're families because of what you spoke about earlier, and that is that they can't be detained more than 20 days, and they know that when they get here that families are treated differently. The problem with that, too, is that now it has led to unaccompanied children coming across the border. I call them children, minors, coming to the border. Many times, too, they're being exploited by coyotes or by others looking to get across, so they will go with the child. The child's not related to them, so that takes even longer for Immigration and Customs Enforcement to determine, are the child and the adult related? Because if they are, they're treated differently than if they're not related, and many times it's difficult to do that. Many times they can't do that within the 20 days, so then that child and adult have to be released. It's just chaotic. There's no way that I think any reasonable person can look at this and go, oh, yeah, this is a thoughtful, reasonable way by which to pursue immigration. Now, if you're for open borders, then you don't want any of this. You don't want any limits on people coming into the country. But you look at other nations around the world, and all of them have a very orderly system. In fact, I believe the United States is only one of two that actually have a lottery system for determining people coming into the country. So I think there are a lot of elements of immigration reform that we need to look at, but certainly border security and the whole system of people seeking asylum, the facilities that we have on the border, the ports of entry, the number of immigration court judges, where they're located, are all things that there should be significant agreement on both sides of the aisle to be able to fix this. And as I said, by any measure, unless you are for open borders, by any measure, this system is broken, and it actually is leading to the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing. I mean, I can't imagine anybody wanting children and families to be subjected what they're subjected to in coming across Mexico and the things that we do. I mean, now if there's a young lady under the age of 16, from what I understand, is that they have to do a variety of different screenings on those young ladies, including pregnancy tests, because of what they're being potentially subjected to in coming here to the United States. I can't imagine by any measure that people say, oh yes, this is a good way for our immigration system to be managed, or is good immigration policy or good immigration law.
It's horrific. The whole thing is horrific, and we're doing nothing about it. And like, look, Congressman Wittman, you pointed it out, when you had control of both houses, you couldn't get this done. I mean, you had a good bill. You had Goodlatte 1. That's for former Judiciary Chairman, 6th District, Virginia, Bob Goodlatte, Congressman. You had Goodlatte 1, that went nowhere. You had Goodlatte 2, that went nowhere. But even if it passed the House, and you pointed this out to me at the time, they were never going to get 60 votes for that in the Senate ever. They were nowhere close to that. I don't even think they would have gotten 50 or 51, because look, there's just inertia in this country for open borders on both sides. We've talked about it. And for working people who see this every day, it is very frustrating that the inaction, you can't get anything done. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We are with Republican Congressman Rob Wittman. He represents the 1st District of Virginia. That's the Fredericksburg, Stanton area, and also through the Northern Neck. So, Congressman, let's get to the subpoena cannons going off by your colleagues in there on the Democratic side. First, they want 6 years of the president's tax returns, and they're pointing to some obscure law saying that the Ways and Means Committee has the right to this, saying it's the law, yet there's no reason they're asking for it other than what appears to the average citizen to be a political weaponized fishing expedition. Is the law real? And is the president going to have to be made to turn these over, and why or why not?
Well, John, the law is real. I've read the law. It is one that I wasn't aware existed. I don't think a lot of other people were aware that it existed. And you wonder, from a standpoint of individual personal privacy, about how Congress decided to give that power to that individual to request those tax returns, and then what is the purpose behind it? Needless to say, Congress has given itself that power, or given folks in Congress that power, those folks in those leadership positions, to demand those IRS records. And as you've said, in this particular case, it's clear that it's for political purposes. If there was anything else, they certainly haven't communicated what the other need is to have that tax return. So it's unfortunate that now IRS tax returns are being weaponized. And what I would encourage people to understand is, this just isn't about President Trump. It's about any citizen. This is a power Congress has given to itself, or certain leadership folks in Congress, to be able to get tax returns, and there's no limitation on it. So I think every citizen out there ought to be concerned. Well, why is that power there? Does Congress need to give itself that power? And for what purposes did Congress give itself that power? I think all those are questions that should be asked of every member of Congress, and Congress ought to re-examine the law and say, is this something that's in the best interest of the nation, regardless of what you feel about what President Trump has or has not revealed with his tax records. And remember, he's had to file a financial report that goes back a significant amount of time. So there's every bit of information in there that people would be looking for to determine his finances and what connections his finances have and what influence it may or may not have within the realm of the job that he's doing now. So it's not like data out there doesn't exist on the president and his financial connections. It does. This is for the purposes of, as I said, the only thing that I have heard communicated by the other side is they want to get it and they want to be able to publicize it. And there's no directive as to what purpose they want to divulge it for. So with that, to me, you default and say, well, the only reason then is for political purposes.
Congressman Wittman, the law that you mentioned, which gives the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee the power to request up to 6 years of back tax returns, is that just for the President of the United States, or is it for anybody in America?
The way I read it, it's for anybody in America. It's not limited to just the President. It gives the power to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and chairman in the Senate to requisition those tax returns, and that it can be given then to the chairman of the committee. There's no limitation on what the chairman of the committee can then do with that information. He can provide it to the committee. It doesn't say that he can't in some way make it public, or inadvertently, and it never is inadvertently, but inadvertently be leaked. So, at least that's the way I read the law, is that it says that power is not limited to any one person or to any group of people, and it doesn't give specific limitations on how it can be utilized. Obviously, if the chairman requests it, I think there are some limitations on what tax returns can be divulged in general, but it's not apparent to me in this that there's limitations on what the chairman can do with it once he receives it. Now, I think there is confidentiality in the tax return itself as it relates to how they're normally used, but this is requisitioned or requested by the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and from there, I'm not certain that there are limitations on it from that particular point.
So basically, what this law says is if the Democrats are in control and they don't like you for whatever reason, they just don't like Congressman Wittman, they can request your tax returns if you chose not to disclose them publicly, or they can choose to get Denver Riggleman's, or they can choose to get Senator Lindsey Graham, or anybody they don't like that they think maybe we can find something, they can just requisition all their taxes, go through them, find out an I that didn't get dotted or a T that didn't get crossed or a mistake that was made or something somewhere, and then turn it over to who's ever running against you in Congress, if you so chose not to release them for whatever reason, and then use it as a weapon. I mean, that's really what this law is, right?
Well, that's the way I interpret it. I don't see that there are limitations on what the chairman of Ways and Means and the complementary chairman in the Senate can do, or what limitations there might be on how that tax information could be utilized by the committee or could be divulged. And we all know that Washington is famous for information that's not supposed to be made public to be leaked.
Right. So is it only the chairman that can request this, or can the ranking member say, all right, I want to see Nancy Pelosi's, I want to see Chuck Schumer's, I want to see Steny Hoyer's, I want to see Bernie Sanders, I want to see how Bernie Sanders didn't ever have a job and has $4 million homes. I want to see all this. I mean, can they just turn around and can this just open it up and the IRS is providing this to everybody, or can it only be asked by the chairman?
Well, it's my understanding that it's a power limited to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and his compatriot chairman in the Senate. So it's those two individuals is the way I understand the law.
So who's the chairman of that committee in the Senate for the Republicans? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know
if it's.
We'll find out. Okay.
Senator Shelby is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, but I know the Senate has a different component. I know the House. Remember, the House does their financial decision making in two ways. Ways and Means Committee is the committee that looks at the revenue side of the balance sheet, and the Appropriations Committee looks at the expenditure side of the balance sheet. So there are two committees in Congress that deal on the House side that deal with the finance.
Well, what I'm getting at here is technically then, because the Republicans control the Senate, technically Shelby or somebody, however that works, could request the tax returns of Democratic leaders, and I think they should do that. If the president is made to give his, then I think, look, I want to see Pelosi's. I want to see her husband's involvement with these Chinese companies. I want to see Steny. I want to see Schumer. I want to see Klobuchar. I want to see them all. So, I mean, this thing is going to turn into. But here's the thing: Republicans never fight back, Congressman. They're just going to sit around and fight the president. They never fight back, and I think you got to fight back on this. Okay, I got to move on to.
John, I think it's the Committee on Finance, just the Senate Finance Committee, and Senator Grassley is the chairman of that committee. I believe that would be the committee, although I stand corrected, but I believe that's the committee of jurisdiction that would allow somebody to requisition the tax records of an individual.
Yeah, I think you get. Look, I think if they get the presidents, I think who's ever in charge of that committee or the president or somebody's got to have the authority beyond the Ways and Means to turn around and ask for every leader of Congress to submit it all, and they're going to find something because look, this is a fishing expedition to weaponize a tax return, which is we have privacy laws against that. And so it's an outrageous abuse of power that the Democrats are going after. They can't solve the problem at the border. They can't solve anything, and yet now they're after the president's taxes. All right, I've only got a couple of minutes. I got to get to the Mueller report. Now there's your colleague saying that there's a cover up here, and they're demanding the whole thing get released without the redactions or whatever they're demanding now. They're saying that. Attorney General Barr was not altogether forthright and candid with his summary. What is your view of this whole thing?
Well, there was a report in the New York Times yesterday with quote-unquote anonymous sources within the Mueller team as to Attorney General Barr's synopsis of the report. And I'm sure you saw today in the Wall Street Journal that folks within the Department of Justice said, no, that's not the case, that Attorney General Barr was conclusive in what he looked at in the report, and that his synopsis was indeed an accurate reflection, and that it wasn't downplaying certain elements within the report. The bottom line is the president has said he wants the report to be made public, so did Attorney General Barr, but they have to do so, John, within the confines of the law. You cannot divulge classified information. That is against the law. You cannot also provide information that is secured under requirements dictated about how grand juries work, because there is the ability. You must be able to protect folks within that context of where somebody might say something about them that can't be substantiated. So you always keep grand jury testimony secure, because you want to make sure that you are securing the confidentiality of folks that give testimony. Because if you don't, then folks are going to say, well, I'm not going to give the testimony freely, because if they do, somebody's going to divulge it, and then they're going to come after me. So you have to make sure you preserve both of those elements, the classified information within that report and those elements of testimony that are protected as they would be for a grand jury. This operates just like a grand jury. You take testimony. It's supposed to be confidential. You want to get information, but you also, in many instances, are taking testimony. You can't substantiate whether that's true or not. People can make all kinds of accusations and questions that are being asked there. Right. And if you put that out there, it just becomes salacious and false accusations. And then with that, it endangers being able to get that any type of testimony before a grand jury in the future, because people say, well, I don't want my testimony to be made public. And it unfairly goes after with unsubstantiated claims about anybody that's being looked at in this Mueller report. So those are two elements of law that have to be followed. You have to make sure the confidentiality with grand jury testimony is maintained, and you have to make sure classified information is maintained. I think the Attorney General will do both of those things, will redact that information, which is exactly what he should do. The Democrats want all of it divulged, and you can't do that because that is against the law.
Congressman Rob Wittman, great summary. Thank you for that so much. We're out of time. I really appreciate your coming on and sharing that with us. Congressman Rob Wittman, Dr. Wittman represents the 1st District of Virginia. He's a Republican ranking member on the Sea Power Readiness Committee. You can get more information. Go to whitman.house.gov. That's whitman.house.gov. Stay right here on the John Fredericks Radio Network.